Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, Data Deep Dive for EDDs, a closer look at Argonne National Laboratory's NERDE and EDCI tools. I'm Brett Schwartz, an Associate Director at the NATO Research Foundation. So with funding from the U.S. Economic Development Administration, Argonne National Lab's National Economic Research and Resilience Center hosts the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer, NERDE, and the Economic Development Capacity Index, EDCI. Now, NERDE consolidates information and data on economic distress, demographics, the existence and emergence of industry clusters, and COVID-19 impacts to local economies, while the EDCI uses publicly available data to assess critical elements that contribute to a county's overall economic development capacity. So during our hour together today, you'll have an opportunity to learn more about these tools and how they can be utilized to support your CEDS and other regional economic development efforts, see live demos of the tools, and ask questions. So we've got a great session in store for you today, but before we get into the presentations, just want to share a few quick framing remarks. So I see a lot of friendly and familiar faces in the attendee roster today, and I know that many of you are aware of NATO and the NATO Research Foundation, but just as a quick refresher, the NATO Research Foundation is the nonprofit research affiliate of the National Association of Development Organizations, which represents regional planning commissions, councils of governments, and economic development districts all across the country. Now, the Research Foundation provides training and support to regional development organizations, primarily those serving small metropolitan and rural regions. We have a large training portfolio, but our major focus is on economic development, resilience, transportation, and organizational capacity building for organizations just like yours. So to learn more about NATO and the NATO Research Foundation, please check out our brand new website at nato.org to learn more. So today's webinar is offered through the Economic Development District Community of Practice, which is funded through a cooperative agreement from the U.S. Economic Development Administration. We launched this 5-year effort towards the end of last year with the goal of building capacity across a national network of 400 EDDs coast to coast through in-person trainings, virtual offerings like this one, networking events, case studies, best practices, and much more. So we're really grateful for EDA for supporting this endeavor, and we're really excited about what we have planned moving forward. So to learn more about the EDDCOP and to stay up to date on our latest offerings and resources, check out the link on our website to learn much more. So really at the core of the work that economic development districts like yours are doing across the country, especially at this particular moment in time, is really about making regions more resilient and prosperous. And we've embraced this definition of resilience as the ability of a region or community to anticipate, withstand, and bounce back from any type of shock, disruption, or stress that it may experience. And this kind of broad definition includes the impacts of weather-related disasters or hazards and the impacts of climate change, but also those economic impacts such as the loss of a large employer or military base, the decline of an important industry, the effects of automation and other changes in the workforce. So the tools that you'll hear about today really can help support your planning efforts to become much more resilient, to benchmark progress, and to really set a proactive vision for the future. And this, of course, is most visibly put into action through your CEDS planning and implementation efforts. And so just want to remind all of you about our CEDS clearinghouse at cedscentral.com, which is really kind of a one-stop shop for all things CEDS, and hopefully many of you have explored this resource over the past 5 or 6 years, where we have, again, webinars and issue briefs and kind of the latest and greatest on all things related to CEDS, including a CEDS 101 section for those of you who may be new to this process. So please check out CEDS Central. This webinar will be posted there afterwards as well, along with all of our other materials that we're developing through this effort. Also, just wanted to remind you that you can stay up to date on all things related to NATO and the Economic Development District Community of Practice through our website, NATO News. It's free, it comes out every Thursday, and has the latest news and resources of importance to regional development organizations, economic development districts, and other partners. So head over to our website to subscribe for NATO News. And as always, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you might have about this webinar, about our larger effort related to the community of practice and our general work at the NATO Research Foundation. We're really here to connect with you, and always love to hear what you're working on, how best we can support your efforts, and to, of course, to connect you with your peers across the country that are working day in and day out on these important endeavors. So before I introduce our speakers, just a few quick logistical information about our webinar. If you do have questions or comments, please submit them in the questions box, which you should see on the side of the screen in a drop-down menu. And we're going to try to get to as many of those questions at the end of our presentations after we go through the demonstrations and show you the real power of these tools. As I mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar will be made available on our website later on today. And everyone that's registered for this event, whether they've attended or not, will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. We also will have a quick survey that'll pop up on the screen afterwards as we wrap up. As always, your feedback and guidance and responses really help us as we kind of craft our work to make sure it's really responsive to your needs. And as we build out this larger community of practice, I'd love to hear what you're working on and how we can best support you. And of course, as always, feel free to reach out and connect with any questions about the webinar or the community of practice at any time. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today. They're all with the National Economic Research and Resilience Center at the Argonne National Laboratories. This is the order that we'll be hearing our speakers. We'll first hear from Ian Hyde, who is the director at the National Economic Research and Resilience Center. Ian's going to give us kind of a big overview about their work, about these tools, and kind of provide kind of a framing perspective on this work and really kind of the direction that things are moving in. Following Ian, we'll hear from Ross Alexander, who's an environmental protection specialist. And actually, I think I might have messed that up. Ross, I'll have to get your actual title there. I think I forgot to update that, but Ross will let you know exactly what his title is. But he will be explaining to you about the NERDE tool and giving you a special demonstration about that tool and what goes into that. Following Ross, we'll hear from Carmi Birdie, who's the manager for data and analytics, who will be demonstrating the EDCI tool, the Economic Development Capacity Index. And following Carmi, we'll bring Greg Gibert, who's the Senior Economic Resilience Analyst, on to help facilitate some conversations as well. So we've got a really fantastic panel that's here to really show you the power of these tools. It's been a real pleasure getting to know them on this project and more, and we really look forward to working together in the future. But for now, I'm going to toss things over to Ian to kick things off with a presentation to get us grounded on these tools. So Ian, the floor is yours. Thanks again for being here.
All right, thank you so much, Brett, and thanks to the NATO team for having us on today and to everybody for joining. So first things first, just want to acknowledge our work is also supported by the U.S. Economic Development Administration through a grant award. And anything that we present certainly doesn't constitute any views of the U.S. Economic Development Administration, but we are very grateful for their support in developing these tools and resources for the economic development community. So Brett, can we go to the next slide? So just a little bit of background about who we are. First things first about Argonne National Laboratory. We are one of 17 U.S. Department of Energy national labs, founded in 1946. And we like to say it was maybe a few months apart, but we are the first of the 17 national laboratories. In addition to the work that we do with federal agencies, state, local governments, regional entities, and others, we are also a Department of Energy scientific user facility. So we have resources like our advanced photon source, which provides very powerful, some of the world's most powerful X-rays. We have an advanced computing leadership facility with the soon to be deployed exascale computer. And then we conduct research in a wide range of areas, anything as diverse as nuclear energy, to nanoscale materials, to now economic development as well. So Brett, on to the next slide. So to let you know who we specifically are, the National Economic Research and Resilience Center, we are actually a brand new team at Argonne National Laboratory, but we are representative of and building on our ongoing partnership with the Economic Development Administration and work that we've been doing for a number of years. But really, establishing the center provides a dedicated economic development focused research function at the laboratory. So we're really focused on providing economic data access, ongoing research and analysis, program evaluation, and then in partnership with others like the NATO team and Brett, also bringing the community together to discuss issues around economic resilience in communities across the nation. So we're organized around 4 key areas. The first of which we're really focusing on today is data access and analytics. So we like to provide really user-driven tools to support the economic development community, whether it's to help with the grant application or with your CEDS or otherwise, conducting longer-term research and analysis, program evaluation, and then our Economic Resilience Learning Collaborative, which I'll speak to in just a moment here. So you'll see the link on the screen. I believe that Greg will be putting it into the chat as well. So on to the next slide. So just to give you a sense for some of the things that we're focused on over the next 12 to 14 months, under that banner of data access and analytics, we're discussing two of our tools, again, the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer, or the NERDE, and the Economic Development Capacity Index today. But in addition, those are really a starting point, and over the course of the next year, we're looking to develop a comprehensive and interactive economic development information clearinghouse. This is something that we very much intend to be rooted in the needs of the community, and therefore there will be a number of opportunities to provide input and feedback along the way as we develop this tool. I will say now and a little bit later in the presentation, we always welcome feedback on whether or not the tools are useful or things that can make them more helpful for you and your efforts, so never hesitate to reach out to us. Under the research and analysis function of our center, we're going to be focused on looking at some CEDS and using some natural language processing to examine trends over time, best practices, commonalities. So again, another area for potential partnership with a number of folks. And we'll also be focused on some longer term research on equity in the economic development context. From a program evaluation perspective, we're looking at new methods to be able to assess and, where feasible, quantify the impact of federal economic development investments. And so this is a long-term effort in collaboration with the U.S. Economic Development Administration again. And then finally, we'll be providing a series of quarterly webinars, research briefs, and eventually a annual conference hosted at Argonne in Lamont, Illinois. So look to hear more from us as we get those different elements of our programming underway. So next slide. So just a couple of quick level setting definitions. What is economic development? This should look familiar. This is the definition that comes directly from the Economic Development Administration, but really focused on creating the conditions for economic growth and improved quality of life, both of those together being a really important aspect to the research that we're doing. And then what do we mean by capacity? That's that interrelated set of institutions, resources, knowledge, skills, and networks that really help to determine a region's ability to implement economic development activities. So capacity is not merely a function of a single person or a single organization, but really that full environment in a given community or region that contributes to those economic development activities. Next slide. So again, we're talking about two tools today. The NERDE, or we affectionately call it the NERDE, is really a tool meant to provide that baseline economic context. And we'll get into the specific elements, but really getting into demographics and understanding if there is economic distress present in a community or otherwise. And then we have our Economic Development Capacity Index, which is that assessment of county level capacity, strengths, and potential opportunities for investment or focus as well. These tools are really designed to be used in tandem. They answer different questions, but are supposed to be complementary in nature and hopefully help communities in different ways. So next slide. So some initial information about the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer. You'll see the link on the screen. And again, I believe Greg will be putting that into the chat. You can also just do a quick Google search of NERDE Argonne, and it should pop up in there as well. The NERDE is a set of 2 Tableau-based dashboards. They're free and publicly available, and we provide the data at 2 geographic extents. First at the county level, but then also we have a specific one at the Economic Development District level as well. I will note that we understand that new EDDs are approved and created on an ongoing basis, and so this is something that we update on a regular basis. The data itself is updated monthly, but in terms of the EDDs that are included, that's generally updated on a quarterly basis, We've had some cases where folks have reached out to us and said, hey, we don't see our EDD in there. Please always feel free to reach out to us and we'll try to get that updated just as soon as possible. Next slide. So what are the different elements that are included in there? We have our key indicators. So that's really focusing on highlighting special need and if there are economic distress indicators within a given county or economic development district. We do have some color coding to indicate whether or not a jurisdiction or an EDD has reached those definitions of economic distress, so you can easily find that out. We also have demographics information, so population indicators, race, ethnicity, educational attainment, other baseline population indicators from the US Census. From a workforce perspective, we have the composition of the labor force participation rate, and unemployment. From the economy perspective, we capture GDP, growth in gross domestic product, as well as the concentration of employment and establishments by industry. And then from the industry perspective, Brett mentioned that we are able to identify the emergence or existence of industry clusters. So we capture location quotient for those top 5 industries for employment, wages, and establishments. And then we show how that level of concentration has been changing over time. Next, we have our risk and resilience tab, which includes information about risks from natural hazards, other resilience factors, things such as whether or not the jurisdiction may have a high concentration of coal industry jobs related to coal communities, or persistent poverty, or measuring broadband access. So a number of different indicators that tell different stories of risk and resilience. And then finally, we have a COVID-19 section that has a couple of our indices that measure changes in gross domestic product and state and local government revenue to really tell that story of COVID's impacts and the recovery from COVID-19 over the past few years. So next slide. So shifting over to our Economic Development Capacity Index, just to provide you a little bit of background on that. It was collaboratively developed between Argonne and the Economic Development Administration, and that development process included a few key steps. First and foremost, we wanted to consult with subject matter experts within EDA to identify goals, data requirements, use cases, make sure this is something that could be used by a broad range of stakeholders working in economic development. We really rooted the actual research and the approach we took in the literature to identify those core capacity areas and indicators of interest. We also looked at a series of publicly available data sources, and in fact, the index includes 53 unique different indicators that are germane to each of those identified capacity areas. We did consult with additional subject matter experts. Want to acknowledge the contributions of folks like the Environmental Protection Agency, Federal Railroad Administration, and others who generously gave us some of their time. Others like the US Department of Agriculture helped us to track down data on things like the creative and inventive class as well. And then of course our partners at EDA. It also included a few rounds of review, refinement, quality control. We really tried to interrogate the index to make sure that the results made sense and were telling as accurate a story with publicly available data as possible. So we have a technical report that goes through our methods and outputs and all of the data sources, as well as the actual tool where you can explore the different capacity areas and individual indicators. Link on the screen and also in the chat. So next slide. So I want to talk for just a minute about what it is and what it isn't. First, what the Economic Development Capacity Index is. It's a collection of publicly available indicators that provide insight into local economic development conditions and capacities. And it's a way of measuring a community's capacity, and I'll emphasize this index is relative to the rest of the nation. It's a tool that we intend to be useful for planning, for strategy identification, funding applications, perhaps to think about things like investment prioritization. And I'll mention it's something that we will be updating on an annual basis so that you can track progress over time. So for example, if you are part of a community that just had an EDD start in the last year, We will capture that in our next update so that you can see that that's one measure of progress within your communities as well. We'll be doing that with all of the other data sources as well. It's just as important to talk about what the index is not. It is certainly not the sole or the definitive measure of local capacity, nor is it a value judgment on the way anybody is performing or doing their jobs, but rather it's meant to tell that broad picture of conditions, both some of which are within the control of a particular organization, but also those that tell the story of broader conditions within communities at that county level. So next slide. So there are a few assumptions and requirements as well. First and foremost with this index, as with anything else we put out there, we want everything to be free and open to the public. So all included data must be open to the public and available nationwide. What that means is there might be some elements of capacity we weren't able to capture here. For example, things like venture capital or some of the private financing that's going into communities that would require the purchase of large proprietary data sources. We weren't able to pull those into this, and we couldn't make those publicly available. So really important when you're reading through the technical report and working with the tool to understand that this is meant to be an open data tool, and therefore that is what it captures. Also, we intentionally have no single overall index score. Having a single number we thought would actually obscure some of the nuances of capacity, and so it's meant to help to pinpoint specific strengths or areas for growth or focus among the 5 capacity areas that we have in the index. Ross will go through those in just a little bit. So generally speaking, you will see some qualitative capacity indicators or scores in there. What does a high capacity mean for a particular capacity area? It means, well, that's well above the national average. Elevated means that it is generally above the national average. Moderate would mean that that individual capacity or capacity area is close to the national average. Limited means that it's slightly below, and low means that it is well below the national average. Now, in any given community, you're going to have a combination of indicators where you're going to come in according to the data very high and somewhere you might come in low. And that's really what we meant by trying to capture that nuance and help to uncover those particular strengths or areas for focus. Some indicators will positively contribute to economic development capacity. So think things like creative class or the number of industry clusters. Those are all going to positively contribute to your economic development capacity, whereas the presence of things like, say, brownfields or watershed distress might negatively contribute to economic development capacity. In both cases, that provides information that can be useful from a planning purpose. We did apply some scaling, recognizing that the size of the community is important as well, and we wanted as best as possible to have an apples to apples comparison between large metro areas and rural counties as well. Next slide. So I'll just go through very briefly at a high level. This gives you a sense for the types of indicators that we included. Again, we're taking that definition of economic development that considers both growth and quality of life, recognizing how important that is to the work that all of you do on a day-to-day basis. So from a human capital perspective, we're again looking at things like educational attainment, income inequality, housing costs, but also looking at human capital from a workforce perspective. So percent creative class or inventive class, those indicators can show a higher capacity for economic development as well. So next slide. From a financial perspective, this is one of my key caveats with the index. Again, our data was able to capture public funding and a public focus. So we have things like local government revenue vulnerability or SBIR or STTR grants from the Small Business Administration or banks per capita. So those all tell the story more of public financing or access to banks. What we don't have are those private venture capital deals or things along those lines. We recognize they're important, but they're not free and publicly available. So when you're looking at the results for this, that is what it indicates. So next slide. From an industry composition perspective, we're looking at advanced industries, establishment births and establishment exits. We're looking at concentration of industries from both an establishment and from an employment perspective. And we also looked at industry diversity. So we took data and used the Shannon-Weiner Employment Index methodology to try to quantify what that diversity from an establishment and an employment perspective looked like as well. Next slide. Infrastructure, we had a lot of indicators, a lot of contributions, again, from folks like the Federal Railroad Administration, other elements of the Department of Commerce and otherwise. So we're looking at anything from transportation infrastructure to broadband, to ports and airports, to access to green space. So a wide range of indicators. Again, some that positively contribute to economic development, and perhaps some of those that, if not addressed, may inhibit economic development as well. Next slide. So finally, with institutions and partnerships, we're looking at things like grant capacity, we're looking at cultural centers, workforce training, nonprofits, things like libraries, but also considering counties that participate in EDDs, recognizing that you all do your CEDS on a frequent basis and are driving that collaboration and that innovation within your communities as well. And then the ratio of economic development organizations. So again, a pretty wide range of institutions and partnerships, all which have a role to play. Next slide. So again, we welcome feedback at any and all times. Our email address, as well as the EDA team, is on there. We love feedback on the tools. We'll try to answer data requests as best as possible, and we just love hearing from you. So with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to my colleague, Ross Alexander, to walk through the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer. So Ross, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to show the correct screen. Let's do monitor 1. Just making sure that, are we looking at the NERDE webpage, just to confirm?
I can't see it right now, Ross.
That's not good.
There we go. Oh,
there
just had it. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So just wanted to give, just to orient folks quickly, I'll be walking through the NERDE tool in a development environment, just in case any sort of unforeseen internet hiccups happen. But I wanted to orient you with the web page and what you would be seeing when you visit the website. When you go to the web address that was linked in the chat, it'll drop you onto the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer landing page. We give you a little bit of an overview of what the NERDE is, what's it include, what our main goals are for this tool, some potential use cases, and then as you scroll down towards the bottom, you'll be presented with a choose your own adventure. You can either dive into the county level viewer, which will take you to data that are only present at the county level, so individual counties can be selected. You can kind of walk through a more finely detailed view of some of the data products that we present, or you can select the district viewer. And for our explorations today, we're going to just focus on mainly the district viewer. And so give that a second to catch up. And as you kind of click on that district viewer page, you're presented again, it'll open up a new window and you can go to, you're presented with the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer Economic Development District Edition. We give a little overview about the tool, some of the main pages that you'll be seeing. So we have some explanations about what we mean by key indicators, demographics, workforce, etc. Here we invite you to select the state that you're interested in. In my case, I'm from Indiana and went to school in southeastern Indiana. So we're going to look a little bit at the Southeastern Indiana Regional Planning Commission. But as you click through, you'll be able to select your state, and then within that state, your EDDs will automatically populate. So you'll be able to select pertinent EDDs to the state rather than playing the game of like, well, which I'm not from this EDD, which EDD is present in which state. So that should be taken care of for you. And from there, after you make these selections, you can then dive into the tool, clicking on any of the jump links, but we'll just start with the key indicators page. Here is kind of where we're presenting the top line summary of activities that have been going on in at the EDD level. We touch on some of the special need indicators as identified by the EDA, such as high concentration of coal jobs. Is there a nuclear power plant? Are any counties within the EDD in a persistent state of poverty? Some rural urban metrics, and then whether or not any of the counties that are adjacent to recognized tribal lands. Present a 24-month unemployment average going through time. We take it back, I think, about 2 years, 2.5 years or so, and then present some, in multiple pages, we'll present some maps that you can then snip and put into presentations or take some top line numbers and use those. So the intent for this tool is to be more a data corral. So when you're needing to find specific numbers, or you're wanting to present something to stakeholders or sponsors at short notice, you have sort of a one-stop shop to gather some very pertinent data to economic development needs, so that we can show those to those parties at a moment's notice. There are a number of drop-down menus associated with some of these pages where you can select. If you are interested in maps where there may be high concentrations of coal jobs, it will then, update and populate that. As Ian was mentioning, we bring in a number of demographic indicators from the U.S. Census Bureau, specifically from the 5-year American Community Survey numbers. So we have sort of the top line numbers of total population, minority percentage, and then also some pertinent at-risk community percentages as well. We can look through maps and select any of the demographic categories that we present over on the right-hand side. So we can select those, and yeah, this is a pretty basic census level data. Moving on, we present workforce numbers, where we're looking at labor force participation rates combined with, again, that 24-month unemployment rate. There's a slider on this map, which you can move back through time if you're kind of interested on where things, have been. And you can step that through time to, unless I just broke it. That's not good. So that we can look at the updated progress that counties have made. And so it'll be a map representation of data that have been presented here in the time series charts. Local economy is going to be data that we've pulled from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, looking at top 5 industries by given attribute. And so here you're able to actually select whether you're interested in top line GDP numbers or whether you're more interested in the number of jobs, and then those charts will update with all of those. And then if you're really interested in specific counties, you can either select all, and that'll give you the EDD view, or you can pinpoint down to where you're only interested in Jefferson County and seeing sort of what that area is up to. So it's a way to offer a little bit of customizability to peer down into that county level detail. But again, if you're interested in only county level numbers, I would highly suggest that you check out the county level viewer. We can get into, in our industry section, we're looking at mostly location quotient data, excuse me, where it'll measure everything relative to a national mean of 1.0. So if the numbers for your specific area are above 1, it means that there is a higher prevalence of those industries in your region compared to the national mean, and then the opposite with, if it's below 1, you're showing less prevalence of those industries compared to the national mean. We break this down by both annual wages, employment, and also establishment. So all 3 of the main categories that are presented through the BLS QCEW there. Moving on to a little bit of risk and resilience. We pull in the National Risk Index ratings for a number of disasters, looking also at some of those top line indicators that we showed on the summary page, whether or not they're nuclear power plants, persistent poverty, coal communities, bringing in also the innovation index that folks might be accustomed to seeing from other resources, and then also presenting sort of the household internet access through an index that we developed at Argonne, just to kind of give perspective of how connected are the counties within this EDD. for those sorts of things. And then finally, we present sort of things in still this COVID-19 lens. We have a couple of homebrew indices that were developed at Argonne to show impact to county level economic activity, as well as local government revenue vulnerability index. For sort of the nuts and bolts of those indices, I would suggest going to the Argonne website and looking for those specific products. There's some great white papers about all of the the data sources that go into those products, but they're really quite useful to reference to a January 2020 baseline to see sort of where we've come from throughout our time dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to that, in addition to the county level and the local level index, we also present sort of things at a top line state vulnerability index score, and then also breaking down some Department of Labor metrics on unemployment claims, both the initial claims and continued claims as we go through time. So those are sort of, I know it's a rapid sort of tour through the tool, but those are the main characteristics. The county level tool reflects similar key areas that we highlight. They're a little bit different in terms of the granularity that we can get to. Here, we're mostly showing that aggregated value, but there is parity between the two different tools that you can kind of tag team depending on your uses and the needs of any given sponsors that you're trying to address. I think I can share the presentation load with Carmi now.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to walk you through the EDCI next. So let me just get my screen shared and we will move on. Apologize, I had it here and it is not showing up as an option for a screen share.
This is Brett. If you want to take a few moments, we've had a few questions I think that have come through. If you want to kind of maybe cover some of those, and you can. Oh, let's see. It looks like the screen just changed. We'll give it one more shot. If not, maybe we'll jump into some of the questions.
So it says it's still waiting to view Ross's screen. Do you have to swap it over to me?
Yeah, let me try it one more time for you. Let's see.
Sorry. There it is. Okay.
Got it.
Let me choose my screen here.
Great. So we see your beautiful backdrop right now. There we go. Perfect.
All right. So you guys can see my screen. I apologize for that, everyone. So thanks for bearing with me here. But Ian gave us a nice overview of the Economic Development Capacity Index earlier, the EDCI. So I'm not going to go too much into what it is, but I do want to point out just two things, and that is that the goal of this tool is to provide that data-driven estimation of capacity. And so, as Ian mentioned, we have 5 capacity areas that we are focused on here: human capital, financial, industry, infrastructure, and institutions and partnerships. And so what we'll do, or what we're able to do with this EDCI tool, is dive deeper into these different capacity areas. So as I'm scrolling down the page, and I think we'll put the link in the chat, what we can see is we're greeted with a quick start option, and we'll get to that in one second. The ability to explore some of these capacity areas in more depth. And then if we keep scrolling, we'll be able to toggle between the different capacity areas. And if we zoom in here and we click on a county, we will be able to get a pop-up that gives us some information about that. So we can start to look into areas of interest to us by sort of panning around the map, zooming in on some pop-ups. We can even search an area of interest here, or use our current location. And we can, again, toggle between all of these different capacity areas. If you keep scrolling further, you'll get a link to the NERDE, where we were just looking at both the county and the ED. But let's do it. Let's do a quick start. We're going to create our own one-pager here. And so this is the EDCI report generator. And what this allows us to do, again, is to get into a county of interest and start to get some information. So Ross was picking on Indiana. I'm going to pick on Illinois since that's where I am right now. And we're going to search for DuPage County. As we type in the state and county here and we hit apply, we are going to see that we get our DuPage County highlighted here. Then as we scroll down, each of these capacity areas is going to populate with the value for DuPage County. And so we can see here that DuPage County has high human capital, but limited institutions and partnerships. And if I keep scrolling, I'm going to get this one pager here that I can snip or copy and paste and bring with me and put into my presentations and reports and things. But wait, you say, I want to understand more about human capital, or I want to dig in to exactly what makes DuPage County's human capital capacity area high. Well, if I click on human capital, I'm brought to a card here that says, what is human capital? Why do we care about it? What indicators are included? And then we can see exactly which of the 53 indicators that the EDCI uses are included in the EDCI human capital capacity area calculation. And so we can kind of dig into that and we can look at some of these individual things. So percent of SNAP households or the Gini inequality index here. We can go back to our report generator. DuPage County is still going to be chosen. And we can say, wait, now I want to look at institutions and partnerships. And again, we're getting the breakdown of all of the different components that make up that institutions and partnerships capacity level. If you really want to dig into this more, we also have, this is the indicator overview page. I just got to it by clicking learn more. Each of these capacity areas is really fleshed out here, and we talk about how they were determined and which of the indicators were included in them. So we can take a look at financial, we can take a look at industry composition, infrastructure, and then institutions and partnerships all the way down here at the bottom. But again, we have tables with URLs, linked sources to all of this information. I'm going to go back to my report page for just a second. We do have, so that indicator overview or that capacity area deep dive section, we're just pointing you back, we're just funneling you to the good information here that is available to you in the sort of overview information. We do have some frequently asked questions on the website that you can visit as well. You can kind of go through some of these. Ian talked a lot about these during the first half of the call, but there is some more information. There's some mailing contact information if you want to get a hold of us for more information. But the nice thing about this is that we can take a look at as many different counties as we want. So we can compare DuPage to its neighbor Cook and hit apply. And now this is where the city of Chicago is located. We can start to see the change. So DuPage County, which is right here, right next door, had high human capital capacity, whereas Cook has a moderate. Human institutions and partnerships at DuPage County was limited. Here it's moderate. So we can start to kind of do some comparison between neighbors or comparisons between other different areas of interest. We can jump to any one of these cards here, and they're available once you run the report up here at the top. And we can run this report as many times as we feel like. So there is a lot of really great information kind of contained in just a couple of pages here. I will pause here for questions. And I think it looks like we have about 15 minutes left for questions. So feel free to drop those in the chat.
Excellent. Well, Carmi, thank you so much. And Ross, of course, for the demonstrations, and Ian for giving us an overview of these tools. Really exciting to see. And as you mentioned, yeah, we have some time. So please type in your questions. I know a few of them have already come through the chat. I'm going to toss things over to Greg to kind of facilitate this conversation with the team. So Greg, if you're ready, I know you've got a few questions on hand for the team.
I do. We're ready to jump right in. We've got a couple of great questions that have already come in, but before we dive into those, Ian, I was wondering if maybe you could address one that we get pretty frequently. How are tribes and territories handled in both of these tools?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. That is a great question. And first and foremost, one of the challenges we encounter with both tribal and territorial data is there is a lot less that is publicly available in terms of those same types of indicators than there is at, say, a county or a municipal level. So currently within the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer, we do indicate whether a county or an economic development district is adjacent to tribal lands. We're looking for ways to get even more information in and also recognize that that's not enough yet. And so as we move to the next phase of our efforts, working with EDA and others, we do plan to include more tribal indicators and territorial indicators as well. We'll mention sort of the same story for the Economic Development Capacity Index. Now, that said, there are a few individual indicators where there is more information available. So for example, for the County Economic Impact Index or the Local Government Revenue Vulnerability Index, we do have dedicated web pages on the Argonne website for territorial indices with the same exact methodology as well. So I think both an indicator of where we are, but also an acknowledgement that we want to put a lot more focus on this moving forward, and something we plan to be a key component within our forthcoming information clearinghouse.
Great, thanks, Ian. Carmi, I think this is a question for you, although anyone on the Argonne team, feel free to answer. Can, in either of the tools, or maybe both of the tools, can you designate a custom geography? And this could scale down to the tract level, multiple tracts selected to sort of create your own region. Is that a functionality for these tools?
So that's a great question. And right now, that is not built into the tool. So you have the option in the NERDE to either look at the county or the EDD. And then in the EDCI, we are looking at the county level. However, we hear you loud and clear, and we understand that people want to be able to select either multiple counties or select their own geographies and get some information. And so that is an enhancement that we are working on to include during a future release.
Great, terrific, thanks. Ian, maybe this is a question for you. Can we elaborate? Is there any technical assistance available for the use of these tools? Do we provide grants or one-on-one coaching? What's the vision, I suppose, for technical assistance in the use of these tools?
Yeah, so at the lab, we don't have funding available per se, but we did provide our contact information, again, nerc@anl.gov, both in the presentation, and we can put that in the chat as well. And we are trying to be as responsive as possible. So if you have a question or want to have a quick phone call or go through the data, please just email us, contact us. We're always happy to have those conversations. We're also looking to use some of the quarterly webinars that we're going to be hosting, as well as these partnership opportunities with great organizations like NATO, to share more about how they can be used. But first and foremost, never hesitate to contact us, and we're always happy to have that conversation.
Great, thanks, Ian. So we have one more sort of general question and a few that are coming in around specific indicators. So let me go to the general question. And Ross, this one might go to you first, and then certainly you can feel free to ask the rest of the team to chime in. Both you and Ian hit on this in different contexts, but could you just give us a general sense of the update cycles for both of the tools, the data behind the tools, and the general refresh cycle?
Yeah, so I can speak to the NERDE tool because it just updated that not too long ago. So for the NERDE tools, for both the EDD tool and for the county tool, we tend to update those about once a month, and normally it's towards the end of the month so that we can try to capture the most recent data that either the BLS is putting out or the DOL is putting out. So both of those tools will be updated normally in either the third or the fourth weeks of the current month.
And Greg, I'll just
Great.
add on for the Economic Development Capacity Index, our intent right now is to update that on an annual cycle, and we'll be able to quantify change over time as a part of that update cycle. There are some cases where we may consider doing something slightly more frequent, but that one will be kicking off our annual update process over the summer.
Great, thanks, Ian. So like I said, we have a couple of more specific questions around indicators in the EDCI. Let's see, actually, no, there's one more broad one I wanted to get to because we get this question a lot. Can you create comparisons of comparable counties and get a list of which counties should be considered comparable based on demographic, size, or other indicators? So this is a question about, can you select multiple jurisdictions for comparison?
Right, so that kind of goes along with, I think, that last question about, selecting your own geography. One thing that we do have, and I forgot to mention, is if you are on the create a report page, there is a link in red that says to download a spreadsheet containing all of the EDCI data, click here. So while the tool itself does not give the option to do that comparison feature, you can bring the data down into your own Excel or however you are happy working with it and do some comparisons that way. Again, though, we hear you. We know that comparisons are something that you guys want to see. And so that has also been flagged as an enhancement option for some future releases.
Great, thanks, Carmi. I know we're going to run out of time here. I do want to get to some of the specific questions. We have one that's interesting here. We struggled with these sort of questions throughout the development of the EDCI. Ross, you might be best positioned to answer this one. Using something like SNAP as a negative seems questionable as an indicator. You could raise the capacity as the requirements are lowered, but that doesn't mean people aren't going hungry. So could you talk a little bit about the directionality of the indicators and some of the choices we had to make when we were forming the index overall?
Sure. So mostly for those sorts of indicators, the directionality is tied to whether or not the desirable outcome is attributed to a larger number. And so those are the choices that we made when we did you'll notice in the methods section for the EDCI, there's a little bit on alignment in there. And so that way we align those scores so that way when we tally everything together, everybody's pulling in the same direction so that you're not going to have a high score being advantageous in one metric, but a high score is less desirable in another metric, and those not evening out the way that they should according to the math, just because they're dealing with a number that doesn't know that better or more desirable scores should be greater and that sort of thing. So we did try to align everything according to whether or not that outcome would be represented that the desirable outcome would be represented by a larger number, either according to the index that we pulled from the source material, or in some cases, like for SNAP recipients, that would be the number of folks within that county being eligible for SNAP benefits and receiving those SNAP benefits. And so that's what we mean when we are talking about directionality with respect to what that number is, so that the beneficial score for that would be to have fewer folks receiving or being eligible for SNAP benefits in that case, as opposed to the desirable effect being that the more folks represented means an indication of greater capacity. So it's a flipping of that to make sure that everything gels together across all of the 53 different metrics that we pulled together.
And Greg, I think that's a great example of something I'd like to re-emphasize from my remarks earlier, in that the capacity index is certainly not representative of a judgment on how well any organization or jurisdiction is performing, but rather with something like higher eligibility for SNAP benefits, that would indicate that there is more of a need for nutritional assistance in that community and could provide potentially an area for focus. So again, we're not providing value judgments, but rather trying to uncover whether there are factors of vulnerability or need as well as a part of that index. And so I think that's a lot of what Ross was trying to get at there.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add additional emphasis on this, this is something we did discuss quite a bit in the development of an index. And so we're open to additional feedback or consideration. Feel free to email us at the email that was dropped in the chat before. We have a couple of minutes here. I lost my question. Shoot, I had a good one. I'm sorry. Excuse me 1 second here. There's a question here. I guess Carmi, this maybe is for you around website functionality. Is there a way to I guess essentially export the visualization to an EDD's website so that it's publicly facing?
That's a great question. So right now, the data itself can be sort of snipped, or you can take a snapshot that way. However, we do have this is served up in a GIS, and so the data is all geo-referenced. So the data that you download is all geo-referenceable, and then the data that's it's showing in the maps is geo-referenced. So what can we email that question to our NERC, and maybe I can walk through some options for displaying that data online, because if you do have some GIS capabilities, there is a way to get that sort of back-end data access. That said, if you just want some visuals, using your sort of snip tool or other clipping thing would be one recommendation to use. So, hope that helps.
Yeah, that's terrific. So if you are the author of that question, can you please drop us a line at the NERC email address, and we will respond more directly to your request. We're almost at time. I have one last question here I want to get to. We're not going to get to everyone's. I apologize. Ross, this is maybe back to you. If you just had one brief moment to re-explain what the indicator values are within the index. The question here is, what are the values are the ratings? They're not a percentage out of 100. What is it actually telling us as a number?
This is a question about the EDCI and how it's presented in the website. That's
right. The number is a value. What does that value represent?
Right. So currently, what we have a couple of different layers in there that we're trying to present kind of a cohesive story. So everything in there currently that you're seeing is a percentile value. So it should be ranked between 0 and 1, with 0 being the lower ranks and 1 being the higher ranks. And this is a national percentile. So we've got 3,000 some odd counties, and we split that over, 1,000, we go out to the 1,000th place numbers. So we can get about, 3 counties within each individual 3 decimal place number from that. And so those are just straight percentiles. If you dig a bit deeper, and what we present in the methodology is that we have calculated Z-scores for everything that we present. Z-scores can be a little tricky to interpret at times, which is why we opted for any of the front-facing, public-facing numbers that you see. It's always going to be that percentile. If you're calculating things from scratch, the way that we outline it in the methodology section, the first step there is standardization through calculation of Z-scores across all of the metrics, which then we rank order into the percentiles in using the positive negative directionality that we were talking about earlier.
Great. Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Carmi. Thanks, Ian. Thank you, everyone, for all the great questions. Brett, kicking it back to you to close us out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg. And a big thank you to our panel today of Ian, Ross, Carmi, and Greg for for a really informative hour together. You know, big thanks for the presentation, but more importantly for the work that's gone into building out these tools and the analysis and the thoughtfulness that's gone into it. But I will just emphasize, as Ian mentioned at the top of the hour, you know, this team is very open to hearing your feedback and responses, and making sure that we're kind of continuing to improve this tool and making sure that it works best for folks like all of you on the grounds, working day in and day out to support your communities and regions. So we're very grateful for this partnership and collaboration with Argonne and with EDA through the Economic Development District Community of Practice. Again, we hope this is the first of many opportunities, both online and in person, in future conferences and workshops to explore these tools and work together and keep refining these opportunities. So thanks again for joining us. Again, there'll be this short survey that'll pop up on the screen, so help us out with some feedback. And then stay tuned for an email tomorrow, which will provide a link to today's recording and slides for you to review, and of course share with your staff and other partners who may be interested. So with that, again, really appreciate you joining us today. Go check out the tools. The best thing is to just play around and see what's working, and give us some feedback as well, and we'll keep working together. So thanks again. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you at a future webinar, or hopefully in person sometime soon. So be well and take care, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.